everyone. Hola todos. My name is Celia Avila de Santiago, and I'm the senior librarian at the Junipero Serra branch with the Los Angeles Public Library. I'm here today to welcome you to today's LA Made program, Illegally Yours with Rafael Agustin. Before we begin, we'd like to thank the National Endowment for the Humanities, our Library Foundation, and our behind-the-scenes staff for helping bring the LA Made programs to you virtually. LA Made focuses on the diverse landscape of Los Angeles, highlighting the immense artistic and performance talent that has developed in the course of the city's eclectic history. If you would like to see more of our amazing programs, please visit our online calendar at lapl.org/events. And for our LA Made programs, visit lapl.org/LAMade. Our website also has blog posts and video links that highlight the library's diverse resources and upcoming programs. We would also like to take this opportunity to recognize and acknowledge the first people of this land, honor their elders, past and present, as well as their descendants who are citizens of these nations. For more information on which territory you may reside on, check out native-land.ca. And now for today's program, Illegally Yours with Rafael Agustin. LAPL is so proud to host writer and producer Rafael Agustin as he discusses his latest memoir, Illegally Yours, a heartwarming and comical look at how a struggling Ecuadorian immigrant family bonded together to navigate Rafa's school life, his parents' work lives, and their shared secret life as undocumented Americans. Joining Rafael in conversation will be writer Carlos Aguilar, who has written about his own DACA journey from Mexico to becoming a movie critic, writing for the Los Angeles Times, New York Times, Vox, and many other notable publications. Viewers attending this free virtual program will have a chance to win a copy of Illegally Yours. So when you get a chance, email ecdept@lapl.org to be entered into the opportunity drawing. So first, before we get started, we're going to welcome Rafael to our LA Made stage for a brief reading of his book, and then we'll bring out Carlos afterwards. So now, welcome to our LA Made stage, Rafa.
Thank you so much, Celia. Thank you for having me.
Thank you
And
for
thank
being
you.
here.
Yeah, thank you to the entire Los Angeles Public Library community. You guys are awesome. And thank you for for checking out the book. I heard like it's on a wait list for checking out the audiobook. That is so that fills my heart. Thank you.
It was so good. It was such a joy to listen to. So I'm so excited for today's reading. Like, I can't wait.
Okay, then I'll get started. I'm gonna quickly share one chapter. This is to me like the heart of the book. Everything is leading up to this big revelation that I discovered in high school that we were undocumented. I didn't know, so I want to share this chapter with you. A quick side note before I dive into this particular chapter: I will be using the word illegal in the way that I used it growing up because it took me a very long time to realize that my own vocabulary was oppressing and criminalizing a segment of our population that only make our economy stronger, our workforce younger, and you can't deny that we make our food taste better. So I'm sure that everyone here tuning in knows that we should never use a word like illegal when referring to another human being. But let's get to the chapter. All right. This chapter is called The Big News. Let me set the scene. It's the late 90s. Backstreet Boys are on top of the charts. Bill Clinton was considered diversity in politics, and I had just turned 16. All of my friends were starting to drive, so I wanted to drive too. I went to the DMV without telling my parents, came home, and this is how it went down. The evening of the big news, I walked into the house holding my driver's permit application. I handed it to my dad and asked, "Can you please sign this for me?" My dad read the DMV paperwork, then looked over at my mom, who stopped cooking her world famous seco de pollo and took a seat next to him. Things started to feel off. "We need to talk," my dad stated plainly. Concerned, I took a seat. Is something wrong? Is grandma okay? Rafa, uh, you don't have a social security number. Huh? Why? Because we told you we're illegal. What? Illegal? I didn't know what he was getting at. So many things could be illegal. Driving over the speed limit is illegal. Insider trading is illegal. Singing happy birthday is illegal because it's trademarked. Drinking alcohol under the age of 21 is illegal. Shit, maybe it was illegal. I looked over at my mom for clarification. She softly nodded her head. We don't have papers. Wait, we're illegal? I exclaimed, now realizing what my parents were driving at. Since no human being is illegal, I was clearly using the wrong terminology back then. But this was before the Dreamer movement. It was 1997, and all I ever heard on the news was how get off my front lawn, Lou Dobbs would vilify undocumented workers. In Spanish, my parents never referred to themselves as illegal, which is why I didn't understand the gravity of our situation until this very moment. Nobody I knew in small town West Covina, home of Troy Aikman and Joan Jett, ever used that word. The most I ever heard my parents say was, no tenemos papeles, which translates to, we don't have papers. My young mind always assumed we would address whatever problems we were having by simply getting papers. But now my dad pointed out that we were illegal. That was like an end of the world comet hitting my frosted tipped head. I struggled to make sense of everything. We didn't cross the desert. We flew here, and it was economy plus, if I'm not mistaken. My mom calmly explained that we came on tourist visas, but then overstayed. She said this while making me chamomile tea. She always knew how to relax me. My dad added that they applied for permanent residencies 11 years ago and had hoped we would have gotten them by now. I didn't know what a permanent residency meant, but it sounded pretty self explanatory since I wanted to permanently be residing in the only place I ever knew as home. I started to get nervous. I was illegal. What did that even mean? I didn't feel illegal. I felt pretty damn American. The chamomile tea was delicious, but not working. How would I ever join the campus Republicans now? That's when it dawned on me, wait, how do you two work if we're illegal and we don't have social security numbers? My mom and dad looked at each other. Well, my mom lamented, we don't have papers, but you're the only one with no social security number. What the? I was already freaked out that I didn't have a green card, but I didn't have a blue card either. I started to feel dizzy. My mom asked me if I wanted more tea. She knew damn well I wanted more tea, but I was upset, so I said no. I got up and started pacing around the room. This made no damn sense. I knew that at 16 and a half I was barely legal, but this was preposterous. I can't be illegal, I demanded. How am I going to apply for financial aid and go to college if I don't have a social security number? Oh my God, can I even go to college if I'm not legal? I need to become legal. We're still waiting for our 3 green cards, my dad said with fake hopefulness. Maybe they'll come in before you graduate. The tremor in his voice assured me that he didn't believe what he was saying. And for the first time in my life, my dad allowed me to talk back to him. You ruined everything. Moments later, I was sitting on my bed wallowing in my own self pity. I didn't know of any other illegals. How could I be one without ever knowing it? I felt betrayed by my parents. I was forced to leave Ecuador for their dream of becoming doctors in the States, and now was paying the price for that dream. This was ridiculous. I looked up at my poster of Pamela Anderson and for the first time thought, I'm even too depressed to masturbate. I'm sorry to talk about masturbation today, but it's in the book, so I had to. And on that glorious transition, I'm going to bring on our moderator for today, the incredible journalist and film critic, Carlos Aguilar.
That's a hard act to follow, I feel.
No pun intended.
True. Um, yeah, I mean that's I enjoy very much how you deliver this chapter. I guess I'll start by asking you. Just I mean, you have been successful in writing for TV. You will run La Leaf and the Latino Film Institute, and I wonder when did you sort of decided that there was specific value in putting your personal story, down in writing, amidst whatever else you were doing, career wise. What was sort of that moment of realization that you wanted to put it down on the page?
Wow, what a great question. I think it started when I first went to UCLA. You know, I go there on an acting scholarship, and I quickly realized that there are no roles available for minorities, let alone like Latinos and Latinas. And this is a place of higher education. You know what I mean? And already we're facing this discrimination and lack of opportunities. So it was there when I was like, you know what? I need to create those opportunities. I need to like write myself into existence. And one of the first things I ever wrote or created was a comedy show. And I did it with my old community college buddies and my old community college professors. I did it while at UCLA. And this was NWC. I talk about it in the book. The chapter is called The Comedy with the Name No One Can Say, because you can't really say it. But it was essentially doing NWC that helped me find my voice and helped me realize how important it is to tell our unique, our unique perspectives and our own stories. That's really where it began for me.
And in terms of the actual book, was there when you were started, sort of collecting writings and bringing memory, or was that much later?
So we're touring the United States, and more important than the show is a comedy, but when you're like in middle America, when you're in Kentucky and Pennsylvania and Ohio, people want to have the Q&As and the residencies and the community programs that we did around this show were more impactful. And I started to see how people who usually don't even want to talk about undocumented immigrants all of a sudden start seeing me as American just by me sharing my story. And it was around this time that I was like, you know what? I need to write my parents' journey into this country. And I didn't know how to frame it until I realized perhaps you do it via the wonder years, right? It was actually one of my great mentors, Lisa Reinhardt, who was like, I think that would be such a great way to tell your like all American story, right? Because I grew up, and the book itself I describe as a coming of age story about an all American family that just happens to be undocumented. And it was Lisa who first put it in my head that why don't you think about writing a pilot on script and think about like telling it as a family comedy, which comedy has always been like my weapon of choice for the theater show, for Jane the Virgin after. Yeah, and that's how it started. I was like, okay, then what would happen if Kevin Arnold discovered he was undocumented in high school? And that's how the story started to form itself.
And in sort of like revisiting, your memories of your parents' journey and your own journey, was there any sort of hesitation of how much you wanted to share? I mean, because I feel like, with the notion of knowing yourself undocumented, there's a lot of fear and shame. I speaking for myself, like not wanting to tell others, or like not wanting to explain sort of the legitimacy of your existence to people that might not understand it. So I wonder if you had any sort of hesitation at first in terms of like how and what to share.
I did, but here was the thing I didn't want to do. I didn't want to write the perfect model minority family, because I didn't want anyone to be like, well, we'll make an exception for you. They're okay. And I hate that narrative. I think it's BS. So I wanted to tell our story, warts and all. And it was very hard. It was very hard, but there's several books that inspired me, that helped me realize that as long as I lean into the vulnerability of it all, I'm going to be okay. And those books include like The Undocumented Americans by Carla Villavicencio, Carla Cornejo Villavicencio. I love the way she spoke about undocumented Americans and mental health. Like we rarely speak about our journeys in those terms and the trauma that are created because of our immigration problems. Then Tina Fey's Bossy Pants also affected me, because I was like, oh, we can write like this. We can write like very accessible and personable and like almost conversationally. And the last one that answers probably your question more directly is Eddie Wong's Fresh Off the Boat. When I read that book, I was like, I didn't know we can talk about our cultural and immigrant hangups, and more importantly, that we could talk about our immigrant parents' shortcomings. That's when I was like, okay, I got to lean into this because it might resonate with a lot of first generation Americans.
Do you remember when was the first time you talked to someone about it that weren't your parents?
Oh my God, yeah. I write about it in the book. The first person that I ever came out of like that, out of the shadows, out of the undocumented closet, was one of my college professors. It was actually Lisa Reinhardt, who I said was one of my great mentors in life. She was the first white person I ever told about my immigration problems. And the way it happened was so funny because she was a great teacher and mentor of mine at the community college level already. But when I was selected to represent our school at an international speech and debate tournament in Prague, she calls me into her office with this incredible news, like, "You're going to Europe, free trip." And my heart just dropped. I was like, "I can't go because if I go, I can't come back." And she was like, "Why?" And it was at that moment my mind was racing, and I was like, "Oh my God, should I tell her? Should I not tell her?" But but because she had been so supportive of my life and my academic career up to that point, I decided to tell her. I was like, I went for broke. And the way she responded to me really affected how I lived my life moving forward. Because she could have been disturbed or disgusted or called authorities, man. And that was it for me. But she was so caring and so sympathetic and leaned forward and tried to call administration and lawyers. And I knew there was nothing they could do, but it just warmed my heart to see someone try to help me for the first time.
Totally. Before you started the reading, you talked about language and sort of how that has evolved, and how important that is. What was that sort of realization for you when you stopped sort of using the term illegal to refer to yourself and to others, and sort of like switched it to undocumented? Because I feel like I would like to think that most people have done that, but I still see it here and there, and I feel like even within the community of Latinos or other undocumented people, it hasn't completely vanished. So I wonder if you could talk about your sort of transition from that term.
Yeah, it hasn't vanished. I mean, people in my family are still learning not to use it. And unfortunately, when like your news, your media, your religious leaders, your teachers, everyone uses it so frequently, not realizing what they're doing. It took me a long time. It took me a long time to realize that immigration is and has always been a labor issue. And that's very important because when I started reading about the topic and discover that the Pew Hispanic Research Center, they discovered that deportation happens most frequently for undocumented Americans on two occasions. One, when undocumented workers try to unionize, or two, right before payday. So that to me was a clear indication that immigration is a labor issue. So when we say words like illegal, it's by design because we're trying to criminalize um, this portion of our population. Why? Because if you criminalize them, you take away the First Amendment right to free speech and the First Amendment right to assemble. So yeah, I try to explain to folks that immigration is more than a moral issue. It's a labor and economic issue. And the words that are being thrown around are being done purposely.
Right. I mean, when you dehumanize a person, then nothing they can do, whether positive or negative, matters if they're, if sort of like the essence of their existence is associated with, illegality, then there's it's sort of like, you've turned it into something invisible real quick.
And let me tell you, when I toured the nation with NWC and I would meet these people who are like, "Oh, get out of my country, you're just a criminal." And I would have to be like, by the way, we pay taxes. Like my parents pay taxes. They're always file their taxes. They pay the federal and state tax. They pay property tax. We all pay sales tax when we go out, but they have no representation. And the idea that there's no taxation without representation is what the American Revolution was founded on. So how do you justify that? And I see in real time these warm-blooded Americans who truly want to hate me. They're just like, "Oh, we didn't know. we didn't know you were paying taxes. I apologize."
I mean, right, not that that should matter to see a
Yeah,
person as human,
exactly.
but clearly those are the things that they care about. So yeah. Tell me about your process in terms of like the collecting of memories and sort of the assembling of a timeline. Are you a writer that has a wall full with notes and sort of like try to decode your own story, or how was the process of putting it together?
Oh my God, my life is a mess. I'll write notes on napkins as I go. I don't care. Like I have notes everywhere. Um, you know, reflecting back on your life, if you've never done it before, it is one of the hardest and most powerful things you can do. It was like beyond therapy, right? It was like therapy on steroids for me. To discover, because you have to reflect, you have to start writing down these stories, but then you want to interview the people you live them with, and it's never the same experience or the same memory. But the hardest thing for me was to discover that some of the stories I held on to dearly in my life were lies. And it blew me away. I was like, oh, I was told that story so I wouldn't ask questions, or I was told that story so I would see someone in a better light. Man, that was so hard for me, because those are the building blocks of who I am as a person, or those are the building blocks of how I see other family members that just started collapsing on me. Eh, I set out to write a comedy, man, and I was crying throughout the entire process.
Was it also difficult for your parents and people that you interview? Did they understand sort of the process of what you were trying to do?
Yeah, it was funny. Like, my dad was just like, "Don't make me look bad. You're gonna make us look bad." And I was like, "Well, you should have treated me better. You should have grounded me in 1998 when I tried to go out on a date." No, that was my dad. But my mom was understanding. My mom has a very big heart. My mom was just like, "I trust you. I know that you're gonna do what's best for you and for the family." So she didn't have that fear. But then again, my mom is remarkable. You know, this is actually funny, and I talked about this with another group. I have the memories of my dad so vividly in my head because we had probably like 10 or 12 remarkable like memories that we hold together. Like when that the Dodgers baseball that I write about the book. Um, I I have that memory engraved in my mind and in my heart. I don't have that many memories of my mom. And I was so angry at myself because my mom was always there. My mom was the constant in my life. And because of that, I don't have those very vivid memories of her. And I only have those vivid memories of my dad, who was absent so much of my life. And that was heartbreaking for me to discover as I'm trying to write down this book.
Right, those are more memorable because there were so few, right?
Exactly, exactly. But the rock in your life who is there all the time, like nothing stands out because she's always there. Oh, God, I was very upset at myself.
Something that I find very interesting too is the way you, like, there seems to be sort of like an association, and I don't know if this is true or not, but that's how I read it. Between your American identity and your love for movies, like this sort of be intertwined in terms of like the foundational movies for you. Uh, what were your thoughts on that? On sort of like associating that notion of being American with film and with movies, and how that sort of shaped you.
I mean, we all have to recognize that the greatest export the United States has is film and TV. It's Hollywood. It's the images that we share with the world. I can't think of like those superheroes or action heroes of South America. Like I can't. Like all I ever saw were American movies. So growing up as a child in Ecuador, all I remember is the Adam West Batman, probably Rambo, but I don't have recollections of Latin American heroes growing up. And that truly, truly defined me. When I get to the United States as a 7-year-old child, and I'm enrolled in public school, I was so confused. I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. What are these African American kids and these Asian American kids? Like, I thought America was just a bunch of like blue-eyed, blonde white people. Like, what's this diversity? I don't get it. And then I saw them for the first time, the Mexican American and Central American kids, and I was like, oh, I look more like you than I do the white kids. What the hell? And that was one of the great realizations of my life, discovering that I wasn't white because I had internalized all this media, all these films, all these TV shows, and thought that that's what's right, that's what's beautiful, that's what I aspire to be, that's what I must look like. And then I'm like, oh yeah, I don't look like that. Neither does the majority of the world.
Right. And so how did you sort of like you know challenge that perspective in movies? I found it interesting because like now you work with the Latino Film Institute at La Leaf, which is so much about sort of like fighting that narrative and sort of like presenting other types of stories. So did you, at what point did you find yourself curious to see, movies from other countries or from other perspectives?
It took me a very long time. It really wasn't until college. It wasn't until college until it took like you start taking like world religions and world literature and world cinema classes, and I'm like, what is this? There's like a whole other universe out there that I had never known, that I had never seen on my television or any of the mass media that I consumed. So it really blew my mind. And I think you're right. I think that's why I'm so like I have such a strong conviction to work with the Latino Film Institute and the work that we do with the Los Angeles Latino International Film Festival and with the Youth Cinema Project. I think it's important that we start seeing the vast arrays of stories that exist out there, not just the very small, obscure some that are approved to go on like broadcast.
Totally. You were telling me yesterday when we first met for this that you voiced your own audiobook. Was that always the plan? Did you always want to do that? How was that experience of giving it voice, quite literally?
Yeah, quite literally. At first, I think there was a hesitation, like, but he doesn't do this. He's never done this. Is he sure? But I wanted to double down. I thought it was important to do it. I really did. Not only because it's my story. I thought it would be cool for there to be a Latino voiceover talent out there doing the book. So I fought to do it. They allowed me to go record, and then they were like, "Oh, this is pretty good. Yeah, yeah, you can do it. You can do it." So luckily they embraced it. But it's just I didn't understand the book publishing world or the book audio world, so I was coming to it for the first time, and man, uh, when I tell you we need minorities in every industry in this in this nation, we need some more in publishing, man.
Is there, would you say, is there like a certain power to speaking it out loud? Because I feel like, you when you write it down, it's on the page, but the different sort of thing to sort of bring it to life when you speak it. And I mean, I could tell by the chapter that you read that there's a lot going on when you sort of like tell the story in your own voice.
Yeah. Again, I intentionally wrote a comedy, but in the audio record, man, we had to stop so much because I kept breaking down. Like we get to like a personal story or a chapter that's too close to home, man. Man, there was a lot of starts and stops. That engineer was quite remarkable. But also, I will say that I like my style is to write in the way we speak. I wanted to make sure that that I can easily say it in the way that people can easily read it. That's just that's the books and the type of prose that I most appreciate. Um, so yeah, it was quite for me. It was quite simple to transition from the page to the audiobook. The only hard thing is because it's so personal. I found myself breaking down and crying quite a bit.
Hmm. What would you say was the sort of the most difficult chapter to write, and why?
The most difficult chapter to write. Um, yeah. Let me be completely honest. That I got my book deal about this story I'm going to tell about this tight knit all American family that just happens to be undocumented. And after I get my book deal, my parents get a divorce after 30 some odd years, and man, it nearly broke me, and I couldn't write the book. I was just like, I felt like my life was a farce. I was like, no, man, I don't feel comfortable writing this book anymore. And my publisher and my agent, they would get on me, and they were like, where's the book? Where's the book? Where's the manuscript? And then finally, I remember a piece of advice that one of my great mentors, Stephen T. Siegel, once told me. You sh- you should always start at the end when you go write a story, because it's what people most remember and what they take home. So I was like, okay, what's the ending of this book? And when I wrote the last chapter of the book, it gave me permission to go back and write the entire book, because I realized that I couldn't hold on to any of the hate or sadness that I was carrying. I needed to protect my memories even from my parents themselves. And the second I did that, and I allowed myself to look back at my life and remember that joy and that sense of wonder and that optimism that I had as a child, it made it easy to write the book. So the hardest chapter to write was actually the last chapter, which is the first chapter I wrote. And then it gave me full permission to write the rest of the book.
So you started at the end and went backwards. It's sort of like you had your goal and you just sort of like built the rest.
Yes. Yes.
Um, throughout your life and in this process, how do you see your sort of your relationship with Ecuador, with a country that that you only lived there for a few years, and um, and I feel like a lot of people that, especially people that remember being there, because I feel like people that come here very very young, it's sort of like a non-memory. But in your case, even as brief as it may be, like, is that something that you grapple with, that relationship to that identity in Ecuador?
Yeah, it's like I don't even recognize it. And one of my favorite lines was when I go back to my grandparents' house for the first time, and I say that I felt like a giant walking down the hallways of my recollections. Like I really did. I felt like I didn't belong there. Um, Ecuador is so beautiful, man. Like honestly, like the biodiversity, the nature, the food. It's just the politics, man. And when it comes to Latin America and our politics, um, as long as they keep making the World Cup every 4 years, we're gonna be okay. But until then, no, I'm kidding. The hardest thing I would say about my relationship with the country is, I went back and I was having conversations with my family, and I told them about my work and what I was doing and the stories I wanted to tell. And I was talking about racism and colorism in our community. And my family just plain simply said to me, racism is an American problem. That's not a problem in the United States. That doesn't exist here. The problem here is classism, not racism. And I was like, wow, that is how far behind you are. You can't even begin to accept the fact that racism is real. That broke my heart, man. I was just like, all right, we have a lot of work to do, an awful lot of work to do. And I'm hoping that our stories, even though mine is a uniquely American story, I'm hoping some Ecuadorians read this and go like, oh, yeah, there is a lot of stuff that we have to fix culturally and societally and in our countries.
I wonder if, like, when you started working in TV and sort of like those, the dream started to realize for you, in telling the stories, did you ever encounter other people that were formerly undocumented or that were DACA recipients, or did you ever find sort of like that community and that specificity? Because of course there's other Latinos and other immigrants, but I feel like being undocumented is such a unique experience on its own.
I haven't in film and TV space, or if I have, they didn't open up to me. But I have at the community college level. I go back and work with and speak at as many dream centers as I can in California, especially. California does a great job of supporting our undocumented students now. Growing up, I didn't have that. I mean, growing up, I felt like I was the only one in the world. It was before the Dreamer movement. I wish I had that movement of undocumented and unafraid growing up. Yeah, I wish I had that sense of community growing up. But yeah, I haven't come across it in the TV space where I'm mostly working yet, but I know I will.
And what do you think is the power of, when um, you have a story of an undocumented family on TV, which I'm sure it's coming thanks to you. So when that happens, what do you think that's, because I feel like that's such a bridge that hasn't been crossed, at least in American television, and sort of like having it so out there, being so taboo as it is still today.
That is my hope and dream, man. There's been a few that have come out that touch upon it.
Hmm.
But I again, like this book, my goal is to make a TV show where that can be both entertaining, emotional, enlightening, but above all, that they start seeing our community as regular Americans, because I feel like we are. If we contribute to the success of this economy and make our country stronger, then at the very least we should be thanked for the contributions that we make.
So, um, I really enjoy your recollection of your deportation from Spain in the just the way that you sort of handle that, the materialization of a fear in a very different context that you ever expected it, perhaps.
It was so crazy. I mean, here I was getting deported, my greatest fear in the world, but it was happening in a completely different way that I ever imagined. I was granted a trip to Spain to go visit some friends when I finally became a permanent resident. But it just so happened that the law had changed earlier that month that did not allow Ecuadorians, Cubans, and Colombians into the country without a special visa. And I showed up without the special visa and got deported. It was crazy, man.
It's also a reminder of how, because I feel like the subject of immigration is often very much tied to the United States, but the way that these laws and ways of sort of like keep people uh, away from certain places or away from certain opportunities is a global thing, right? Like sort of like creating a hierarchy of like who can come and who can't and under what terms.
And more importantly, when borders are open and when they're closed, right? When do you need labor? When do you want the labor to stay away? I point this out in the book that the hardest realization for me was, here I am in Europe. I'm in a Spanish prison, and the majority of people in that jail were black. They were from Venezuela, they were from Colombia, but they were all black. And I'm like, Jesus Christ, this racism is like international. You know what I mean? It's not just like an American problem. Like the way my family said, racism is an American problem. I was like, no, it's right here. It's everywhere.
But that's
And
also
I think it's important that we talk about racism and colorism within our own communities, right?
right. Yeah, it's a heavy realization to see that it's not a
Yeah.
unique problem, but
Yeah.
spread out. Um, Tell me about having. I mean, the importance of having your book in Spanish. For for family or for your parents to perhaps feel a little closer. How did that process go to have it also in Spanish?
Well, we're currently working on it. It's almost done. It's going to come out next year in Spanish. Right now, it's only available in English and like printed form and audiobook. But I'm very excited. I'm most excited because I was talking to my grandma, who's like 98, who was sad the other day. She's like, I'm so sad because you did this big thing and everyone is celebrating you and I can't read it. And I was like, but it's coming in Spanish, I swear. So that's all I want. I just want my grandma to be able to read the book.
What did your parents say when they read the book?
Ah, well, my all I wanted to do was to honor my mom's journey most of all. Again, she was my rock. She was my everything, and as long as she was content with the story I told, that would have been fulfilling. So I gave my mom the early version of the book before it was published, and I kept hearing her like laughing in her room. She's like, "Oh my god, I can't believe you remember that story. Oh my god, I can't believe you wrote about that." And then she got to the last chapter, which is like the first chapter I wrote, and I just waited for a reaction, and she wasn't reacting. And finally, she comes out of her room just crying, and then she just gives me a big hug, and we just held each other in silence for like 6 minutes, and that was it, Carlos. That was the only thing I needed for this book to accomplish. Everything else was just icing on the cake, man.
Amazing. And once you took it out into the world, what have been those reactions from people that either identify or sort of are surprised or have a new perspective thanks to the book?
There's been a lot of commonalities that I'm finding. I'm getting a lot of people reach out to me who are first generation Americans, and I have a chapter called "How to Disappoint Your Immigrant Parents Without Trying," and everyone's like, I can't believe, like, that's exactly how I felt growing up. Because I tell people, like, the biggest secret of my life was not that I was undocumented. The biggest secret of my life was that I wanted to work in Hollywood and was too scared to tell my immigrant parents. So that sentiment, so many first generation American students and now young executives felt. So they reach out to me a lot about that. But the most beautiful thing has been the fact that it's not like just Latinos and Latinas who reach out to me or relate to the book. It's children of immigrants. I cannot tell you how many children of immigrants from all walks of life have reached out to me. The best pictures I get right now are like my Chinese American friend who's like, I forced my dad to read your book, or a stranger I've never met before. They're like Indian American. They're like, I'm asking my mom to read your book, and having like this conversation between first generation children and immigrant parents that the book is sparking. That to me means so much.
That's amazing. Um, I also find it interesting that when you describe, the moment you became a U.S. citizen, it feels so fittingly anticlimactic. Like it's not anthemic. It's sort of like I think you describe it as sort of like just another day in the work week, that you had to get through that week. Why did you sort of decide to approach it that way? Other than, of course, that's how you felt it when it happened. But I think there's something interesting about the how the book starts and how it ends in terms of the journey to becoming, an American on paper, like
Yeah.
a real one on the page.
It's because it was bittersweet. I mean, remember, it was just my mom, my dad, and me. Like, that's who came here. That's who survived here. That's who maneuvered their way through everything. It was our hustle. It was our secret that we kept. Um, and then eventually they moved back. They were like, you're successful enough, you can take care of yourself, and it's time for us to go to try to reclaim our dreams, right? I end the first chapter with the greatest lesson my parents ever learned, that the American dream is not for you but for your children. So when my parents realized, okay, we came here and we weren't able to accomplish what we came to accomplish, but Rafa will. So let's wait it out until he's okay. And once they thought I was okay, they left. They went back to South America. Um, so by the time I get to become an American citizen, I do that process by myself. That's why it was so bittersweet. It was almost like, it's almost like, how do you define home? Because home for me was always where they were at. And now that they're gone and I'm here in a country that's supposedly not mine, but it's the only country I know, this is my home, and now I'm trying to build my home without them. That's why I treated it that way. I had to for my own, like, for my own emotional journey at that point in the book.
Before we go to the audience questions, if there are audience questions out there, um, I really love how you end the book, and I'm gonna read it because I don't want to butcher it. But is the quote by your mom that says, "We didn't want you to grow up feeling different because dreams shouldn't have borders." Um,
Yeah.
and you mentioned now that that's the first thing you wrote, so I find it very powerful that sort of you began with that chapter with the ending. Um, yeah, just tell me about that quote, and was that something that sort of like stuck with you forever?
Hey, Carlos, it's the quote that changed my life. After, again, I grew up an all American kid, oblivious to everything. And then when I discover I'm undocumented, my all American world comes crashing down on me. And I was in a funk, and I was like, why? What's it all worth it? And I was rebelling, and I was like on drunk and undocumented all the time. And I'm a teenager. And then finally, when I asked my mom why she didn't tell me this truth about our reality. And when she said that quote, she said, because your dad and I didn't want you to grow up feeling different, because dreams should not have borders. Dude, it changed my life. I was like, wow, yeah, you know what? You're right. And you did the right thing. People ask me, are you mad or are you happy that your parents didn't tell you the truth? And I wouldn't know either way, because this was my unique journey in life. But I was I'm thankful that she did the best that she could, and she, kind of like shielded me from this harsh reality about our immigration status.
Did you ever wonder? I feel like the reasoning behind that decision, stems from not wanting you to sort of like hinder your dreams, or hinder the things that you could feel you were capable of. Do you ever wonder what could have happened if you had known always that you were undocumented?
Well, I speak to adults who grew up knowing, and they were like, it was crippling. It was crippling at 6 years old to know this truth, and to be like, don't talk to anybody, or like make sure you don't say the wrong thing, or you might get deported. I didn't grow up like that. I grew up like high-fiving authority. I didn't care. ICE agent, what's going on? You know what I mean? Like, I didn't know. But uh, there's no right or wrong way. All I know is that at the very least, I can say my parents tried their best, right? And that's all I can ask for.
Amazing. I don't know if behind the scenes people have the questions. Maybe Celia. I think
I said
you're muted.
Sorry, all of us are in the back, like ugly crying. This is so beautiful. So we have an audience question and a couple of questions from us. So from Kevin, and this one is for both of you. Since you're both writers, do you both believe in the idea that the more specific you make something, the more universal it becomes?
I'll let Carlos take this.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I think there's some truth to that. I guess the example that I could think of is I wrote a piece about being undocumented and sort of like this sort of strange relationship that I have with Mexico, which is where I'm from, in the sense that I haven't been there in 20 years, and the notion of not recognizing a place that exists but not in the way that you remember it. And so I wrote it in relation to Alfonso Cuarón's Roma, which is also a very specific sort of vision of someone that's doing, working on memory and talking about their own childhood, which is, you know, very different in terms of like class and opportunities than mine. But even so, I was able to sort of like within his personal story find sort of strands of truth that spoke to my story, and I feel like it, that relates to the idea of like by him making something so specific about a period of time in his childhood from a unique perspective. uh, I was able to sort of like see things that I recognize in my own story. So I think that there's some, I don't think it's always the case, but I think there's some truth to it.
Yeah, I would add to that and say that to me the specific is universal because it's about the emotional truth of that specificity. I when I first started writing, and I actually didn't know story structure or character development. I would try to make up these stories and then realize the more I made them or model them after my life for that specificity, the more powerful the story. So yeah, I would agree with that statement.
Okay. And so, do you have any plans for future books? Both of you.
I mean, now Carlos needs to write a book because this man has a remarkable story and he's quite prolific. Carlos, are you thinking of writing anything?
Not at the moment. I mean, I've never done it. I feel like that's a different beast. Just looking at your book, I'm like, that's a lot of pages to write. So
Just very large font. That's how you get them.
right. That's the
Um,
trick.
I've been fortunate that the book sold very well, and my publisher has asked me for a follow up book. So I'm currently in the middle of figuring out what that is, and it might be my current living situation of living like the Golden Girls with my mom and grandma. So I'm trying to figure that one out.
Oh, that sounds very excited. Sign me up. I will read that. So, how is your writing process different from, switching over to novels from your TV experience?
Oh, that's a great question. When I first wrote the first draft of the manuscript and I submitted it, it was like 9 months. I put all my blood, sweat, and tears into this. I gave birth to this manuscript. I turned it in, and my editor was like, good try. Let's go back to page one. And I was like, no. It was so like heartbreaking. But she's the one who pointed out, she's like, you're still writing like a TV writer. You have to step it out. What are you feeling in this moment? You have to like express that and write that for the audience. And I was like, I can't just write cut to and go to the next scene. She's like, no, you can't do that. So that was the hardest thing for me to learn. Like, we're so economical in our film and TV scripts, but in a book, oh my God, like no, you have to like play it out. What are you thinking? What are you feeling? What's the moment like? And yeah, that was a big change for me.
So how many copies, like, so how many versions did you go through before you kind of were headed in the right direction, or before we got our final one that we have now?
Well, it's hard because you're constantly rewriting it,
Mhm.
but I will say that all the stories were there, but they weren't in chronological order because I was treating each chapter like its own episode of television. And finally, she was like, "Listen, just put everything in chronological order, step it out, and your book is done." I was like, "Ugh, fine." Then that's what had to happen. So after the 9 months, it probably took an additional, probably like an additional 6 months. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
You're not selling it to me. You're not convinced. You're
It's
not
it's it's the
encouraging me.
most painful thing I've ever done, man.
But then you get to, do fun interviews with the library, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly. That's why we do
it's
it.
it's worth it.
That's why we do it.
So we do have another audience question from Pedro. So what does assimilating mean to you? It does not seem like you had to, since you had a typical American childhood, as you tell it.
Wow. What does assimilation mean to me? Um, and Carlos, I'm going to let you answer this too because we have similar experiences. Um, it, for the longest time, I always felt bad that I was bicultural, like how I'm like 50% like Latino, but 50% American. And I never quite liked that idea until I recently heard a professor, Dr. Ana Cristina Ramon, who's the
Mhm.
co-author of the Hollywood Diversity Report. She pointed out that actually we're more unique than that. We are 100% Latino and 100% of the mainstream. And that's to me a different phenomenon. And that I actually do like because that's how I felt. Like I'll go watch Game of Thrones right now and then walk over and watch a telenovela with my grandma. You know what I mean? Like we can still do that. And for the longest time, I'm like, oh, I don't know if I should be doing this. I don't know what bicultural 50-50 means, but I understand it better when it's like 100%. So in those terms, I, I don't feel like I assimilated. I feel like the country's assimilating to us.
I'm trying to think about how to answer this because you know I feel like when you learn English, that's sort of like the first step. To sort of like learning how to communicate in a language that you didn't grow up speaking. And when I first came into this country and I went to a school that was, mostly Latino kids, but most of them were sort of like first generation born here. And I remember this feeling of them looking at me as me being closer to them, to their parents than to them, because I was an immigrant from Mexico. And so, there was a strange divide because of that. And sort of like, I was a Mexican from Mexico, not a Mexican American. And so with time I made friends and sort of I learned English, and just sort of start sort of becoming more part of those of those groups and sort of assimilating to them and fitting in more. But there's always some things. There were always certain things that I knew that other people wouldn't understand. And in relation to being undocumented, I feel like there are silly things that people that don't have that experience don't even think about. Like you don't have a California ID, and you have to use an identification from your country, like a passport, a matricula, to go into a club or to go to a bar. I remember those things, like the fear of being stopped by police, or when people ask you, oh, you're Mexican. How often do you go back? And then you have to sort of like, juggle. How do I answer this? How do I tell them that I cannot go back? or how do I avoid this question? So I think that I've managed to sort of like find my place, that in here that makes me feel like I belong here for the most part. But at the same time, I'm always reminded of those things, and so I don't think I've ever fully assimilate, because there will always be things that are very specific to an experience that doesn't fit the American sort of experience as is described by the mainstream. Sorry, that was a very
I
long-winded.
like Carlos's answer better than mine. Pedro, go with that one.
I like them both. I think there were elements of both that a lot of us can relate to. So, uh, so Pedro, if you have any more questions, let us know. But thank you both so much. This was such an amazing conversation. The book was great. Um, I know we have some love in the comments, and people are placing it on hold on audiobook now too. So to hear you tell it, and Carlos, we're looking forward to your book. Oh, and thank you, Pedro.
One
So
day.
thank you. We loved both of the responses too. So, it was a very special program, and it was wonderful to have you both. So I'm trying not to cry but it was beautiful. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you everybody at home for joining us virtually. For today's LA Made program. And remember to check out the library's online calendar at lapl.org/events for upcoming LA Mades, including our next program on Thursday, October 27th at 4 p.m. For Sid the Cat. I hope people show up. Los Angeles-based concert promoter Sid the Cat presents Began with a Vision, a hope and hard work. Join founders Brandon Gonzalez and Kyle Wilkerson to hear their story of how they turned a small, fiercely independent business into a tight-knit community of artists, musicians, and concert goers. Viewers attending the program will have an opportunity to win a free copy of Sid the Cat magazine. Until next time, we truly appreciate all of your support. And don't forget to email us for your opportunity to win a copy of today's book. The email is now on the screen, so ecdept@lapl.org for your opportunity to get a free copy of Illegally Yours. And thank you all. Until next time, we truly appreciate all of your support. The success of LA Made and all of our library programs cannot happen without viewers like you. So thank you all so very much, and have a great night.